Let me tell you one of the things I did like about being in Denver, playing with Mahmoud Abdul-Rauf. And people that see Steph now, it remind me of him.
When you think of pure scorers, his name may not be the first to come to mind, but once his name does come up, you know he's well deserving of that distinction. He was lightning quick with one of the prettiest jump shots in the league, and he wasn't afraid to use that jump shot from 25 or 30 feet away from the hoop, because he knew he was probably going to make it. But if you got up tight on him, he'd cross the defender out of his shoes, or drive past him only to pull a great shot fake to give himself a wide open look as the defender flew by. But you definitely didn't want to foul him, as him at the free throw line was the closest thing to guaranteed points. So there wasn't much teams could do to slow down Mahmoud Abdul-Rauf. And unfortunately, it would be controversy that brought his NBA career to an abrupt halt. But before that occurred, he was leading an up-and-coming Denver Nuggets team in scoring year after year, which wasn't a huge surprise, after he had become one of the most prolific scorers in NCAA history. But on top of his career being cut short due to controversy, the same controversy is the first thing attached to his name in basically every headline. So his incredible on-court play has become overshadowed and forgotten over the years. But during his short prime, Mahmoud Abdul-Rauf was must-watch basketball, and that's why he's the topic of today's episode. Let's jog your memory. A native of Gulfport, Mississippi, Mahmoud Abdul-Rauf had an obstacle to overcome from a young age, yet one that also helped him in a way. Abdul-Rauf suffered from the brain disorder known as Tourette's syndrome, which causes tics and involuntary movements, but he wouldn't be diagnosed until the age of 17. Tourette's can also lead to the brain creating seemingly unattainable goals of perfection, and this was most present in Abdul-Rauf's brain when he was on the basketball court. But this would lead to a meticulous need to perfect every aspect of his shot, to make sure it was nothing but net every time. Abdul-Rauf would become a Mississippi basketball legend during his time at Gulfport High School. He would lead the Admirals to multiple state championships during his time with the team, and his individual accolades would pile up, as he was voted a parade second-team All-American as a junior, as well as Mississippi's Mr. Basketball in 1987. Then in 1988, he would average 29.9 points and 5.7 assists, while again being named Mr. Basketball and a McDonald's All-American. And after the dominant high school career that he had, he would be one of the most sought-after recruits in the nation, and he would choose to go just down the road and attend Louisiana State under Hall of Fame head coach Dale Brown. And during his time playing for the Tigers, Abdul-Rauf would only add to his legend. The Tigers were one of the worst defensive teams in the nation, but when it came to offense and scoring, they were top 5, as the addition of Abdul-Rauf alongside senior Ricky Blanton gave the Tigers elite scoring, and overall their starting lineup would combine to average over 82 points per game. But it would be Abdul-Rauf who stole the show, as he would turn in arguably the greatest freshman season in NCAA history. He would play in all 32 games and average over 30 points per game, as he finished second in the nation in scoring, behind only Hank Gathers. He shot over 48% from the field and nearly 39% from 3, as he was attempting nearly 7 threes per game just a few years after the NCAA had even adopted the three-point line. He scored less than 20 points just 3 times, and had some performances that were straight out of a video game, like dropping 48 points in his 3rd career game versus Louisiana Tech, or giving Florida 53 just 4 days later, or maybe when he gave Tennessee 50 in a February 10th win, or how about his career high of 55 with 9 threes versus Ole Miss in March. Okay, I'll stop, but point is, it was borderline unfair what he was doing to some teams. And when it was all said and done, he had set the single-season freshman scoring record with 966 points, which still stands today. LSU had finished the regular season at a respectable 20-10, but they lost their final 3 games to end the year, including losing to Tennessee in the first round of the SEC tournament, even though Abdul-Rauf scored 40. So they didn't have a lot of momentum entering the NCAA tournament, where they would play UTEP and their star point guard Tim Hardaway. And even though Abdul-Rauf scored a game-high 33, he would go just 1 of 8 from beyond the arc, as LSU would get bounced in the first round. But Abdul-Rauf's historic freshman season ended with him being named to the first team All-SEC, as well as SEC Player of the Year, and even a consensus first team All-American selection, behind averages of about 30 points, 4 assists, and 1.5 steals per game. One thing LSU was missing in 1989 was size, as no one in the starting lineup stood taller than 6'7", and they did a pretty good job addressing that, as they would welcome 7-foot sophomore center Stanley Roberts back to the team after sitting out his freshman season due to academic ineligibility. and also bring in a highly touted 7'1" freshman named Shaquille O'Neal. Abdul-Rauf's scoring would drop by a couple points, but this is to be expected when you have two of the nation's top big men on the court. Nonetheless, he would still be 7th in the nation in scoring, with nearly 28 a game, as part of a great trio with Roberts and O'Neal. He would shoot close to 8 threes per game and still hit almost 36% of them, while also shooting 91% from the free throw line. He would hit a career high and school record 10 threes in a February 10th win versus Tennessee as well. After going unranked the majority of Abdul-Rauf's freshman year, LSU opened the year ranked number 2, but this would be as high as they'd get, as they would lose to Kansas during the NIT in their second game of the year. Overall, they would finish the regular season at 22-7, which would include a couple highlight wins, like defeating eventual national champion UNLV, as well as defeating Loyola Marymount 148-141 in overtime. LSU would again lose in the first round of the SEC tournament, this time to Auburn, and would draw Villanova in the first round of the NCAA tournament, who they would defeat in a modest performance from Abdul-Rauf, as he would score just 16 points on 50% shooting to help push LSU through to a second round matchup versus Georgia Tech and their lethal weapon 3 trio. This would be a very close game that saw all 5 LSU starters score 13 points or more. But the defense keyed in on Abdul-Rauf, and he also just couldn't get his shot to drop, as he finished with just 13 points on 5 of 15 shooting and would foul out late in the game, as LSU lost by 3 points to end Abdul-Rauf's season, a season in which he repeated as SEC Player of the Year and would again be named First Team All-SEC and a consensus First Team All-American, behind averages of about 28 points, 2 assists, and 1.5 steals per game. There wasn't much else Abdul-Rauf could do to improve his already high draft stock, so after just 2 seasons, he would declare for the NBA draft, at the time leaving LSU as the 6th leading scorer in program history, having scored at least 30 points in 28 games, including 4 games with 50 or more.
With the 3rd pick in the 1990 NBA draft, the Denver Nuggets select Chris Jackson from LSU.
The Denver Nuggets were coming off a 43-39 season with a playoff appearance, but were now in a transition period, as the Nuggets chose not to re-sign franchise legend Alex English, and also traded point guard Fat Lever to Dallas in the offseason. But even as high of a pick as he was, the Nuggets already had a shoot-first point guard in Michael Adams, who would start over Abdul-Rauf during the 91 season. The Nuggets also made a couple other important moves that defined their 91 season, in trading for the Lakers' Orlando Woolridge in August, then hiring former Loyola Marymount head coach Paul Westhead in September. The 91 Nuggets are one of the most interesting teams in NBA history. Under Westhead, they ran a run-and-gun offense that saw them become the highest-scoring team in the NBA, at nearly 120 points per game, while only making 300 three-pointers all season. But these weren't the Denver Nuggets, they were the Enver Nuggets, because they had no D, as they would allow nearly 131 points per game, which included a 162-158 loss to Golden State in the first game of the year, then allowing 107 first-half points to Phoenix a week later in a 173-143 loss. All in all, they allowed at least 100 points in every game this year, while allowing less than 110 3 times and more than 150 9 times. Abdul-Rauf would have setbacks this year, as he missed 15 games due to an injured foot and also gained 30 pounds over the course of the year. However, he would still score in double figures in 45 games and notch at least 30 points in 4 games, as he would finish 4th on the team in scoring among players who played enough games to qualify, and would also finish 2nd in assists. Additionally, his scoring would be 5th among rookies, as he would be named 2nd team All-Rookie. But as exciting as the Nuggets were offensively, their playstyle didn't translate to wins, as their 20-62 record would be the worst in the league, and Abdul-Rauf's rookie season ended with him averaging about 14 points, 2 rebounds, and 3 assists per game. The Nuggets had no defense, so what do they do in the 91 draft? They select the best defensive prospect in Georgetown's Dikembe Mutombo. The team's top 2 scorers from the year before were both now on new teams to start the 92 season, but Abdul-Rauf still wouldn't find himself as a starter, as that role now belonged to newly acquired Winston Garland. But it didn't help that Abdul-Rauf was still overweight and out of shape, as he was reportedly really struggling with the fame and attention that comes with being an NBA player. And to try and improve his state of being, he began studying the teachings of Malcolm X, and would convert to Islam at some point in 1991. And it's understandable that the pressure was becoming a lot, as in just his 2nd year in the league, he was already being labeled by some as a bust, as Mutombo was quickly becoming the face of the franchise, and Abdul-Rauf was fading into the background. Abdul-Rauf would play in 81 games this year, but saw a minutes decrease, which in turn led to a statistical decrease as his numbers dropped across the board, yet he would still be the only non-starter to average double figures. He would again score in double figures in 45 games, but wouldn't crack 30 points once this year. The Nuggets were averaging over 20 points less than the previous year and were now a bottom 5 scoring offense. And although their defense had improved, they were still in the bottom 10 in the league, as they would finish the year at 24-58. And for the regular season, Abdul-Rauf averaged about 10.5 points, 1.5 rebounds, and 2.5 assists per game. Changes were occurring in Denver, as going into the 93 season, they had a new coach in franchise legend Dan Issel, and had drafted a couple franchise mainstays in LaFonso Ellis and Bryant Stith, as well as traded for high-flying point guard Robert Pack in the offseason. But the biggest news was that Garland was gone, and Abdul-Rauf had dropped about 25 pounds, and was looking a lot more like the player who dominated the NCAA. And his offseason efforts were rewarded with the starting point guard duties, and Denver wouldn't regret this decision. Abdul-Rauf played and started in 81 games, and would lead the team in scoring and assists, and after shooting about 41.5% over his first 2 years, he shot 45% from the field and over 35% from 3 this year, and his 93.5% from the free throw line was second in the league. He would have 70 games in double figures, including 4 games with 30 or more, and his much improved season saw him voted as the NBA's most improved player, and the Nuggets were getting better, as they had improved to a respectable 36-46 record, but would still miss the playoffs. Another interesting highlight of Abdul-Rauf's career occurred during All-Star Weekend, where he participated in the dunk contest, even though he had never dunked in an NBA game. Reportedly, he was invited to participate after Nuggets general manager Bernie Bickerstaff sent the league footage of him dunking in practice. But for the season, he would average a career-high 19.2 points, 3 rebounds, and 4 assists per game. So I know I've been referring to him as Mahmoud Abdul-Rauf the entire video, but up until this point, he was actually known as Chris Jackson, his birth name. But due to his conversion to Islam, he would change his name to Mahmoud Abdul-Rauf prior to the 94 season, which would loosely translate to elegant and praiseworthy, most merciful, and most kind. The 94 Nuggets featured an underrated starting lineup, as all 5 starters put up 12 points or more, and only one shot below 45%, while their bench featured Pack, hard-nosed forward Brian Williams, and rookie Rodney Rogers. Abdul-Rauf played another healthy season as he would appear in 80 games. His scoring dropped slightly, although he would still lead the team. However, his assists went up slightly to finish second on the team. His shooting had improved to 46% from the field, and he now led the league, shooting 95.6% from the charity stripe. Mutombo had become a defensive force, as he averaged over 4 blocks per game for the first time in his career, en route to leading the Nuggets to a top 10 defense. Abdul-Rauf would have 71 games in double figures this year, and 3 with at least 30. The Nuggets would hover around 500 the whole season, but their 42-40 record would squeak them into the playoffs as the 8th seed, where the 63-19 Seattle Supersonics were waiting for them. The series would start as expected, as the Sonics won the first 2 games by double digits, as Abdul-Rauf scored just 7 points on 3 of 12 shooting in Game 1, then scored 15 on 5 of 15 shooting in Game 2. The Nuggets made it a series with the Game 3 blowout, where Abdul-Rauf would score just 10 points on 3 of 8 shooting. And then the Nuggets surprisingly tied the series with a Game 4 win, in which Abdul-Rauf had just 5 points on 2 of 7 shooting. And then the Nuggets would make history in Game 5, as they would become the first 8 seed to defeat a 1 seed in the playoffs, after winning 98-94, even though Abdul-Rauf continued to struggle with just 8 points on 3 of 10 shooting, as he would finish 6th on the team with just 9 points per game this series and only dish out 10 assists across the 5 games. The Nuggets got the Jazz in the second round, and Abdul-Rauf would get a chance to redeem himself, and for the most part he would, as he led the team in scoring. However, he barely shot 40% from the field in a 7-game loss to Utah. The Nuggets took the same approach as they did in the first round, as they would drop the first 3 games before winning the next 3, but then would lose Game 7. Abdul-Rauf scored 16 in Game 1, followed by a postseason career high of 23 in Game 2. He would then score 20 in Game 3 on 44.4% shooting, which was his highest mark of the postseason. He would then score just 6 points on 2 of 10 shooting in the Nuggets' first win of the series, but would dish a postseason career high 6 assists. He would redeem himself with a 22-point performance in Game 5, but then score just 9 in Game 6, and finished the series with a 14-point performance in Game 7. So it wasn't the end the Nuggets were hoping for, but the fact that they were within one game of a conference finals appearance with their top scorer playing poorly led to some optimism around the years to come. But for the regular season, Abdul-Rauf averaged about 18 points, 2 rebounds, and 4.5 assists per game. The Nuggets continued to load up as they brought back virtually the same team, but had also signed sharpshooter Dale Ellis and drafted Fab 5 member Jalen Rose. Denver would experience a couple significant losses though, as after just 6 games, they would lose LaFonso Ellis for the season to a knee injury. And then Pack would be lost for the year in mid-February, also to a knee injury. The Nuggets were deep, as they had 7 players average at least 11 points, and Abdul-Rauf would lead the way with 16 per game. And although his scoring again dropped, he would shoot 47% from the field. However, Abdul-Rauf had also surprisingly began the year coming off the bench, with Pack acting as the starting point guard, until his injury put Abdul-Rauf back in the starting lineup. And Abdul-Rauf would still score at least 30 points 5 times, and would shoot over 38% from 3. About a month before the Pack injury, with the Nuggets sitting at 18-16, head coach Dan Issel resigned, as he didn't like the person he was turning into. He would be replaced by assistant Gene Littles, but the Nuggets would go 3-13 under Littles, so GM Bickerstaff would step in for the final 22 games, in which the Nuggets would go 20-12, and again sneak into the playoffs as an 8th seed at 41-41. The Nuggets would face the Spurs and MVP David Robinson in the first round, as it looked to be a great matchup between the best offensive big man and Dikembe Mutombo, who had won his first Defensive Player of the Year award this season. And although Robinson would average just 19 points on less than 43% shooting, Mutombo would be in foul trouble every game, including fouling out of Game 3 after just 30 minutes of play, as the Spurs, who were just an overall better team, swept the Nuggets, with 2 wins coming by at least 16 points. Abdul-Rauf's playoff woes would continue for the most part, as he would have 8 points on 1 of 8 shooting off the bench in Game 1, then as a starter respond with 21 on 7 of 13 shooting in Game 2, before finishing the series with 11 points on 4 of 12 shooting in Game 3. And for the regular season, he would average about 16 points, 2 rebounds, and 3.5 assists per game. Going into 96, the Nuggets had traded Pack to Washington, but Ellis would make his return during the season, and aside from bringing back all their key pieces, they had also added athletic forward Antonio McDyess in the draft. Bickerstaff would coach the team for the entire year, but they would finish just 35-47. Abdul-Rauf would play just 57 games this year, but put together his best season in those 57 games, as he tied his career high with 19.2 points, while dishing out a career high 6.8 assists. He also shot a career high 39.2% from 3, as he was making more than 2 per game. Additionally, he would again lead the league in free throw percentage at 93%. And he had his best games this year, like a career high 51 points and a career high 9 made threes in a December 12th win versus Utah, as well as a 30-point and career high 20 assist performance in a November 15th win versus Phoenix. But the bigger story around Abdul-Rauf was happening before the games tipped off, as he had been refusing to stand for the national anthem all year. Yet this hadn't been an issue of national attention throughout the season. But then in early March, the story started to get picked up by radio shows and newspapers. And when asked directly about his reasoning, Abdul-Rauf would tell reporters that he believed the American flag is a symbol of oppression and tyranny, and had been that for a long time, which would lead to him receiving death threats. The league would respond by suspending Abdul-Rauf indefinitely on March 12th for not following a clearly defined rule stating that players are expected to stand in a dignified line during the national anthem, and this suspension would result in him losing over $31,000 per game. Interestingly, Hakeem Olajuwon, who is a devout follower of the Muslim religion, expressed confusion around Abdul-Rauf's decision, as it was Olajuwon's understanding that being Muslim entails respecting the culture and tradition of the country you're in. Abdul-Rauf's suspension lasted just 1 game, as he would come to a compromise with the league that he would have to stand, but would have the option to put his head down and close his eyes, which he would begin doing there on out, often reciting an Islamic prayer during the anthem. And head coach at the time, Bickerstaff, would later refer to the situation as a distraction, while Abdul-Rauf's reputation was now extremely tarnished. He would come back to play 4 more games this year, even scoring 27 versus Toronto on March 18th. But after 6 minutes of play in a March 21st loss to New Jersey, he was shut down for the remainder of the year with a sore foot. And in his 56 games, he would average about 19 points, 2.5 rebounds, and 7 assists per game. During the offseason, Abdul-Rauf was traded to the Sacramento Kings for Sarunas Marciulionis. The Kings featured perennial all-star Mitch Richmond and were coming off their first playoff appearance in over a decade. Abdul-Rauf would play well for the Kings as he appeared in 75 games and started 51 of them, and would find himself as the second leading scorer on the team behind Richmond, while shooting over 44% from the field and over 38% from deep. He would still have 50 games in double figures and score at least 30 points twice. But the 90s Kings didn't have much success, as this year they finished 34-48 and missed the playoffs, with Abdul-Rauf averaging about 13.5 points, 1.5 rebounds, and 2.5 assists per game. Unfortunately, Abdul-Rauf, who continued to get negative fan reception, saw his role decrease significantly in 1998. He did suffer from a corneal ulcer this year, which forced him to miss significant time, but still, after being the team's second leading scorer the previous year, he would see action in just 31 games this season with 0 starts, averaging about 17 minutes per game while logging a lot of DNPs, so he couldn't really get into the flow of the game with his opportunities to play being so sporadic, and in turn would average his lowest numbers across the board, as he would crack double figures just 9 times this year. And the Kings continued to struggle, finishing at just 27-55 and missing the playoffs. And Abdul-Rauf finished the year averaging about 7.5 points, 1 rebound, and 1 assist per game. Abdul-Rauf's contract was set to expire, and the controversy continued to follow him, as his chances of signing on to another NBA team seemed non-existent. So at just 29 years old, he opted to go play for a professional club in Turkey. However, he would not even finish the season, as he would instead choose to retire, as he lost interest in the game of basketball, partially due to the team he was playing on being poorly run. Abdul-Rauf would remain retired for the 2000 season before making a brief comeback when he signed with the Vancouver Grizzlies before the 01 season. He would appear in 41 games for a 23-59 Grizzlies team, and although he would play just under 12 minutes per game, he would be tied as the top scorer off the bench, and would shoot a career-high 48.8% from the field. The season would end with him averaging about 6.5 points, half a rebound, and 2 assists per game. He would be a free agent at the end of the year and would never play in the NBA again. He would continue playing professionally overseas until around 2011, and has most recently been playing well in the Big 3 league. So Mahmoud Abdul-Rauf's NBA career is clouded by one major controversy that would end up being the nail in the coffin of his time in the league. But before his reputation was tarnished, he was one of the most talented offensive players in the NBA. He could shoot from anywhere, was one of the fastest players on the court, and possessed a killer crossover as well as one of the best shot fakes of all time. He could fly under the radar because he never had the insane stats that he put up in college. But it wasn't to say that he was no longer capable of that. It was just not what was needed on the Nuggets teams, which he excelled on. But he was still a leading scorer on a good NBA team for years, and was relatively efficient for the type of player he was, and the amount of long-range shooting he liked to do. But he could also slash and finish at the rim. And if you fouled him, you might as well just add 2 points, because he was automatic from the line. Abdul-Rauf is the epitome of a player that was before his time, as there's no telling the damage he would have done in today's NBA. Unfortunately, his on-the-court performance often takes a backseat to his controversy. But if you're strictly talking about the basketball playing career of Mahmoud Abdul-Rauf, he was one of a kind. But that's it for today's episode. Hope you enjoyed it, and don't forget to subscribe for more videos like this one. If you like this one, check out this one on his brief teammate in Denver, or this one on his brief teammate in Sacramento. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.